Hey guys, welcome to the Journey of Ruth Discipleship Podcast, where we encourage listeners to love Jesus, study his word, and reach others. I'm your host, Courtney Lowman. Well, today we are in week 2 of a 4-week series. The whole point of this summer series is to talk about topics that might come up in a discipleship setting. Last week we talked about loving your parents and honoring your parents as an adult. That can be really difficult. This week, we are going to talk about biblical conflict resolution. It doesn't matter who you are. If you are in a relationship, conflict is going to happen. So how do we resolve it in a way that honors God? How do we resolve it in a way that honors the other person? How do we do that in a way that shows love and leads to a full restoration of the relationship? But then again, is a full restoration even always possible? Or are there some times when the resolution does not go the way we think it is? So that's what we're going to be talking about today, biblical conflict resolution. Now, before we do, I wanted to mention our shop over at the Journey of Ruth website. We have some wonderful gifts that I think would be perfect for the graduations and the birthdays that you're going to be attending here in the next few months. I know that so many young men and women are going to be moving into their dorms. And if you have any young women in your life, a perfect present for her would be a scripture print to put on her new dorm wall. We also have our Bible journal for busy women, which would be great for any young mom or any young college student that you know. And then we've got great mugs. We've got some great accessories that can go right along with those beautiful presents. So I encourage you to head over to thejourneyofruth.com and check out our shop so that you can choose the perfect gift for the person that you want to bless this summer. All right, let's step right into our topic, biblical conflict resolution. Well, we know that conflict is just a thing of life. And we also know that it's something that if it's not your conflict, then I don't know, there's just something fascinating, I guess, about watching people in conflict. That is why we have reality TV, is because that's, if you've watched any reality TV shows, you are watching people get into fights and be in conflict of some kind. And for some reason, we think it's entertaining. Gossip. That is why gossip exists. Oh my gosh, tell me about the conflict going in somebody else's life so I can feel better about my own life, because that's not currently happening in my life. And unfortunately, it's something that if we don't squash it right away, number one, it can grow. And number two, it becomes fodder for other people's gossip and other people's entertainment. And that's never what we want to have happen, especially within the church. But the truth is that if you are in relationship with somebody, conflict is going to happen. It's a part of life. And I think it's not there's a reason why the topic for today's podcast is not how do we avoid conflict, but instead, how do we resolve conflict? Because it's going to happen. And we just need to be prepared with the tools to resolve that conflict. When we are discipling others, there is going to come a point where they are going to come to you as their discipler and say, I've got this conflict and I don't know what to do. How do I resolve it? And so I've got some suggestions for you today. I've got some tips and some tricks I'm going to suggest you use, and then feel free, take these and pass them on to anyone that you're discipling who needs a little bit of guidance in the area of conflict resolution. The first thing that I always suggest is that we have to understand that it's going to require a little bit of humble pie. Usually biblical conflict resolution, you're going to have to, if you want to do it right, you have to set your pride aside, and you're going to have to approach the situation with humility, which I understand is very difficult, but it's also the very grown-up thing to do. We don't want to be walking into a situation and look like we are the child in that relationship. We want to walk in with humility and approach it as an adult. We also have to understand that, especially if we are in conflict with somebody who is not a Jesus follower, the way that we handle this conflict will speak so much to them about who you are as a Christian. The way that you deal with this conflict will become part of your testimony and their testimony, because they're going to watch you and see what you do well and what you don't do well. And so we have to really think about those that we are in conflict with and know that other people are watching us. I think that learning to deal with conflict correctly, it benefits our friends, all of them, those that are Christians and those that aren't. And it's going to benefit you as a person, because it's going to, if you can learn how to deal with conflict correctly, it's going to affect every relationship that you have. Your marriage. I tell this to the young women that I disciple. Right now, they're dealing with conflict with friends, and they're learning how to deal with that correctly. But because they're practicing it now with their friends, that means they're going to be able to deal with conflict correctly when they're married. It means that they're going to be able to deal with conflict correctly when it happens with their parents. It means that they're going to be able to deal with conflict correctly when it happens with their kids. So no matter where you are in life, married, single, parent, now is the time to start working on how to resolve conflict correctly. We must remember that the reason why we have to deal with it is because ignoring the problem will cause tremendous damage emotionally and physically. Not dealing with a conflict means that you're holding things inside, and that's not healthy for you emotionally. Also, a relationship with another person, friendship or romantic or whatever, familial, it cannot continue to grow in a healthy direction if there's conflict between you. Even if the other person has no idea that there is conflict between you. I think in marriage, that's one of those things where, they're like, what's wrong? You're like, nothing. I'm fine. We do it in friendships too. I'm good. I'm fine. Nothing's wrong. But the truth is that until that conflict is resolved, we do not have the opportunity to continue to grow that relationship. So this is why we must face the problem up front. So not only the fact that we face it, but how we face it is extremely important. Now, I want to step into the reason why I used the title biblical conflict resolution and not just conflict resolution. Because the truth is that God is very serious about reconciliation. He does not leave it to where we're wondering if he thinks we should reconcile. Does God really think this is important? Yes, he does. This is how important he thinks it is. We know that if we look into the Old Testament, or when we look at the traditions of the early the Jewish church around the time when Jesus was here on earth, that sacrifice and bringing a sacrifice to the altar was very important. It was a huge part of their the way that they honored God, the way that their religion worked. And Jesus is so serious about reconciliation that in Matthew 5:24, he actually says, if you go to offer your sacrifice at the altar and you have a conflict with a brother, leave your sacrifice at the altar, go and fix the problem, and then come back and give and offer your gift to the Lord. He literally says, I want you to take your worship. I want you to stop the worship moment that you're in, and I want you to go and I want you to resolve that conflict and then come back, because you cannot offer your spiritual act of worship with a pure heart if you have got contention in your heart and in your mind. In Hebrews 12:14 through 15, he actually encouraged us to strive for peace with everyone. And so these are great verses, Matthew 5:24, Hebrews 12:14. If you've got someone who's like, but let's be honest, do I really even need to say anything? Do I need to work through this, or can we just ignore it? Jesus says no. No, you can't ignore it. In fact, I don't even want you to come to worship me in the way that I've asked you to worship me until you've resolved this conflict. And so that's why I put biblical in the title, is because if we are resolving conflict in a biblical way, it means we do it immediately and without excuse. Because God says, hey, you need to resolve this conflict. Now, also in the Hebrews verse, it talks about how the reason why we need to do it is not just because God commanded us, but the reason we need to resolve that conflict immediately is because we do not want to allow a root of bitterness to grow in our hearts. And that's why we can't ignore it. Because if we don't resolve that conflict, we begin to resent that other person. Some of you are going, no, that's never happened to me. And I mean, if it hasn't, great. Maybe you're great at resolving conflict. But I think about a friend of mine, we were talking about how if we're frustrated with someone, we will often have the fight in our head before we go and talk to them. Anyone else? And you're in the shower and you're going through how the discussion is going to go. Or maybe you're not even planning on having the discussion, but you're going to go and have the fight with yourself in your head in the shower. And the truth is that when you go and actually approach that person, it never goes the way you think, the way you practiced, right? It never goes the way you practiced. But we can get so spun up about something, a conflict that doesn't get resolved, that it actually settles and begins to take root in our heart. And that root of bitterness is going to affect every relationship in your life, not just your relationship with that person that you need to, come to resolution with. It's going to affect every relationship in your life. All of a sudden, you have a conflict with a friend and you're going to start realizing that it's affecting your marriage. Your conflict, your odds with a friend, and you're going to realize that you're taking your frustration out because you haven't taken your frustration out of them, or you can't take your frustration out of them. You're going to take it out on your kids. So that root of bitterness that begins to grow in our lives affects every relationship, which is why you cannot allow that to happen. And if you have allowed it to happen, you need to go in as soon as possible and perform some surgery and rip that root out and go and resolve that conflict, because you don't want to be sitting there in a place where you are kind of run by the bitterness in your life instead of the joy that God's asked us to have in our life. Our God is a God of joy and a God of peace. He is not a God of contention. And so we want to be able to resolve that as soon as possible. How do we not resolve this? I think all of these things that I'm going to list, you can almost never have I ever, never have I ever done these things to try to get my anger out without going to talk to the person, right? Never have I ever gossiped about somebody to another person instead of going and talking to the person I was actually mad at. How many of us had to put a finger down? Never have I ever ghosted a person and not talked to them for a very long extended amount of time because I was frustrated at them. Okay, we'll stop playing this game, but you get the point. How do we not deal with conflict? You don't gossip about them. And we're going to come back to okay, well, what if I need to talk to somebody about this situation? We're going to talk about how to do that appropriately. But we don't gossip about them. We don't ghost them and just stop talking to them, so that leaves them wondering what happened. All of a sudden we were friends and then we weren't. Maybe you've had that happen to you. We don't blast them on social media, especially the vague post about how you're mad at someone, but you don't use anyone's name. And that leaves everyone wondering, oh, was that me? Or it leaves them wondering, oh, who was that? Who was it that made you mad? and you get questions and then you get to talk to people. Now you've gone to the gossiping, right? No. Social media is like not the place to take out your frustration on anyone. Even the president of the United States, not the place, guys. Okay? And you're definitely not going to fight with them verbally or physically. And if you are a guy listening to this, I'm talking about you. My husband, he's like, hey, sometimes guys, we just got to duke it out and we're fine. Okay, I guess I understand that like need for physical release, but I think there's a way that you can get out that physical anger in a way that doesn't include punching somebody else in the face. And then you can go and talk to that person and actually get the words out and actually get the emotion out. Ladies, it's the same thing for us. We may not be physically punching somebody, but we can throw a lot of really awful verbal punches in someone's direction before we actually deal with the conflict. Don't do that. Because you're going to cause a rift or you're going to say something you can't take back. And then sure, you can resolve the conflict, but now you've got another conflict that you have to resolve. So do not fight with them physically or verbally. Okay, so what do we do? What do we do? And so I've created 4 S's that are going to help us to remember the steps of conflict resolution. So I like to make things really easy to remember and really applicable for anyone that I disciple. So this is a great thing to take to someone who's walking through conflict resolution and be like, here, these are the 4 S's that I'm going to suggest that you walk through. And you know what? I'll just go ahead and put this document up in the show notes, and you can go and actually download it and talk through it with someone. What are the 4 S's of conflict resolution? I'll just go ahead and put that in the show notes. The first one is you need to stay calm and seek advice. So whenever you're offended or if conflict has happened with someone, your first thing is to stay calm and not freak out and not immediately respond with whatever words are in your head, because probably the truth is that they're not really what you want to say. It's your emotion speaking. So we want to stay calm, and we want to recognize that we are not mad at the person necessarily. We're mad at the sin. And then we're going to go to seeking advice. Now, this is where I said we're going to talk about, well, I need to talk to somebody. How do I make sure that that's not gossip? And that is a great question. What is the difference between seeking advice and gossip? Well, my parents always said, and I've just continued to pass this on to anyone that I disciple, that a problem only goes up. A problem goes to somebody who can help you find a solution. And so if you're just telling like somebody that isn't going to have a solution for you, it really has no way of helping, that's probably gossip. And then I always say like, okay, you can seek advice from one person, maybe 2. Once we're at quote unquote seeking advice from 5, 6, 7 people, now we're gossiping. And we have to be really careful that we don't like let a good intention, which is trying to make sure that we are handling this correctly, roll into gossiping. So you need to stay calm and you need to seek advice. And what that advice, I hope, is going to lead to is forgiveness in the situation. Next, you need to set your pride aside. What is yours to own and what is yours to share? I ask myself this every time I am in some kind of conflict. What is yours to own and what is yours to share? You need to be the bigger person in the situation. You need to be the adult if the other person is not in a situation where they can be that. Is your hill worth dying on? That was given to us as marriage advice, actually. If you're mad at your spouse, is your hill worth dying on? Or are you okay to just secede that hill and say, this is something that I want, but I see that this isn't the direction you're headed, and I'm okay with backing up. or I see that this is going to lead to conflict and I'm okay with just not dealing with this. So what is yours to own? And once you figured out what's yours to own, that may mean that you need to apologize for sin in your part of this conflict. Next, what's yours to share? So first of all, part of what's yours to share is asking for forgiveness. If you have identified how your sin helped lead to this conflict, so you're going to ask for forgiveness, that's yours to share. And the other thing is you are going to share the pain and that you are feeling in this conflict, but you're going to do it with one assumption in mind, and that is that the other person is not trying to be malicious. I know that maybe they were, but we are going to be looking for resolution here, not just for listing the complaints. And I also saw somewhere, don't be, oh man, I forget the, what they said. It was very funny. Don't play war historian. I saw that in some of the notes that I was looking at. Don't sit there and list all the things that they've done wrong in the last 3 years. That's not what I mean by what's yours to share. I mean, in this particular conflict, what is it that you feel needs to be resolved so that the two of you won't be in conflict about this in the future? Don't be like, and this, and that, and you did that. That's really easy to do when we're really upset. So if you're thinking about this ahead of time, right, you're seeking that advice, know before you walk into a conversation with somebody what's yours to own and what you need to ask their forgiveness for, and what you don't need to talk about. And then know what's yours to share. What is the one or two things that you really want to talk to them about and try to work through? Don't try any more than one or two things, because it gets overwhelming and then they feel attacked instead of feeling like you're there to reach some kind of resolution. So that second one is set your pride aside. So you've got stay calm and seek advice, then set your pride aside. Then the third S is speak peacefully. So when you are sitting down to resolve conflict, do not attack the person, attack the problem. We have to remember that there's this beautiful verse in Proverbs, and it says, "You may think you've won your case in court until your opponent speaks." And so if we are like a lawyer coming into a situation and we're like, I'm going to tell you all the reasons that you are a bad person, that person's literally going to be like, am I on trial here? No, we are looking to resolve the problem. So we want to attack the problem, not attack the person. Because once you begin to have that conversation, you may begin to realize that the situation from their perspective was very different. And so then if you attack the problem together, you guys can come to a better, probably more swift resolution than if you're attacking each other. There are so many scriptures in the Bible that talk about not letting bitterness be within you, making a peace with each other, being, even in James 1, it talks about being quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And that's just a great way to think about it. Go into a situation with where you're resolving conflict and be ready, yes, to talk, but to listen as well. So be ready to listen. And when you are in this moment of conflict resolution, you're listening, you're slow to speak because you're listening so much. You're trying not to get into a place of anger. I think that honors the other person. And we said this last episode that one of the reasons we need to love our parents is because they are a creation of our Creator. And we are called to love God's creation. That is the case here. We must see this person sitting across from us as one of God's creation, and therefore we are called to love them. Now, in a second, we're going to talk about what biblically addressing conflict looks like. But before we do, let's get to that fourth S. So we had stay calm and seek advice. We have set your pride aside, speak peacefully, and finally set boundaries. When we come to a resolution, sometimes that resolution requires setting boundaries of some kind with that person. Maybe it can be like, hey, I see that we're coming into conflict every time we talk about this topic. Every time that we talk about how you spend your money and how I spend my money, we end up fighting or judging the other person. So let's just not talk about the way we spend money. Let's just set that boundary in our relationship right now. Sometimes you have to set a boundary with that person. If someone is continually hurting you, if someone is continually coming into conflict with you, like on purpose, that may mean removing regular contact with that person. That may be the best way to resolve this conflict, is to limit your time with that person so that you're not continually in conflict with them. But we have to remember that the whole point is for forgiveness, a point of forgiveness to be reached. And so if you're like, I can forgive them, but I also know that I need to distance myself, it's okay to set that boundary. So hopefully at the end of your conflict, you're setting boundaries so that you don't ever get to this point again. So those are your 4 S's. It's stay calm and seek advice, set your pride aside, speak peacefully, and set boundaries. Now, I do want to say that the Bible actually has a process that we are supposed to go through. And this is very important because it is not the way that I see conflict dealt with in the world. So Matthew 18 gives us a 3-step process for dealing with conflict. It's Matthew 18 verses 15 through 17. I highly suggest you go and read it and take some time to look through that. Step 1, you're going to go personally to that person, you and that person, and you're going to try to work this out, just the 2 of you. Just the 2 of you talking, walking through these 4 S's, figuring out how you can get past this conflict. If step 1 does not work, I didn't say if you don't want to do step 1. I said if it doesn't work, if you're like trying and there's no resolution there. Or maybe it seems like you reach resolution and then the conflict happens again, whatever it might be. Step 2 is that you go with 1 or 2 friends. I don't mean you get your team, they get their team, and the 2 of you battle. You find someone or a couple people that can act as mediators between the 2 of you. Maybe help you hear each other better. We have marriage mentors that sometimes are very good at, not sometimes, they are good, but it's helpful for us to have them listen to like me say something and then for them to help Jeff hear my heart a little bit better. And for some reason, sometimes he can explain his heart to me, but it's easier if someone listens to him talk and then says, do you see that Jeff is feeling this or dealing with this? I'm like, oh, I guess that's true. So you bring 1 or 2 trusted people between the 2 of you guys to help work this out. And then step 3. Now, this is specifically talking about conflict within the church as far as the Matthew verse is concerned. And so it says if that doesn't work, then you actually bring them before the elders, or you bring them before a larger group of friends to try to work this out. And if there is no forgiveness, if there is no repentance on the part of either person, then it actually says then the elders should intervene and they might need to be removed from the body. Once again, the church might have to set boundaries until this person can come to a place of repentance and ask for forgiveness. It's the same thing for you, that you might need to bring more people, or you might just need to set that boundary of, okay, until we can find a resolution here, I'm sorry, but I'm going to have to back out of this relationship for, really the health of both of us. Most of the time, I've talked to several people in ministry, and I've talked to a lot of people in discipleship, and most of the time it doesn't get past step 2. That you bring a couple people and you're able to resolve it at that situation. Very rarely have I seen it go all the way to step 3 where you have to set some really hard, fast boundaries. But it does happen. What I do see happen more often is that people skip step 1 and they just go to step 2. And they go and they collect their couple of people, and then they go to that friend, and that friend feels attacked because they thought their conflict was with one person, and now they feel like their conflict is with 3 people. And they're like, why couldn't you have just come to me and talk to me? That's all we needed to do was just to talk, you and I. But people skip to step 2 because they want to gather people that are like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, you go get them. Yeah, do that. And then they feel like, okay, now I can go and do. No, go to that person individually and then as a group. I hope that these steps kind of help you know how to walk through this biblical conflict resolution a little bit better. Biggest thing I think is so important is that conflict in the world is often looked at as, I'm going to get mine. I'm going to be right. I am going to hold my ground until you realize that I am right. And biblical conflict resolution actually says, look, how can we come to a place of peace? If that means that I have to give a little and you give a little, and then we are able to forgive, I think that's great. Now, the same as last week, I want to mention here that forgiveness does not mean forgetting. Forgiveness does not mean, hey, we've forgotten this like it never happened. That's not what it means. You can forgive someone and continue to work through whatever that behavior was. I forgive you. Now let's continue to work on how we can work through healing and walking through this. Just like God forgave us before we were perfect, because we're not perfect, we're sinners, and we make mistakes all the time, and he continues to forgive us, right? Just like God forgives us despite our sin, we have to do the same for others. But then we get to work together on how to resolve this conflict. I want to say 2 verses that I just want to encourage you with today as we finish up. First one is Matthew 5:9, and it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God." We are called to be peacemakers in our world. And sometimes it's hard because sometimes you will feel like you are the only one making peace. But that is what we are called to. And the second is Romans 12:8. It says, "If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all." Actually, that was Romans 12:18, not 8. As far as it depends on you, you can do a lot here to resolve conflict biblically. And the other person may not even know how to do that. And as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. Do everything that you can to resolve the conflict in your life before that root of bitterness begins to settle in. Do not let that happen. Bless others around you by resolving conflict correctly and not letting it ruin relationships, romantically, with friends, and with family. There is a way to deal with conflict where that relationship comes out stronger on the other side, and those relationships can continue in your life. I hope this has been encouraging for you guys today. So I hope you guys will take this information that you have received and kind of file it away. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead and put the 4 S's of biblical conflict resolution on the show notes. And I would encourage you guys to take this and share this with people that you are discipling. Conflict does come up. You will need to use this, or you will need to encourage somebody that you're discipling how to do this. And if this is the first time that you've heard about this, great. I'm so excited to give you another tool you can put in your tool belt and use when you disciple. I encourage you to go check out our website, journeyofruth.com, where, of course, you can visit our shop and get any presents you need for any of the celebrations you're going to be joining this summer. We also have all of the show notes, and we have information on I'd love to come and speak week at your group or at your church. And if you're interested in that, please head over to the speaker tab on our website, and you can actually get in contact with me. We can talk about, hey, what would you like me to speak about? And what does it look like to have me come and join your group for a few hours? Now, I've asked this before and I'm going to ask it again. Please share the show with your friends. You know people that I will never meet, and I can't wait for them to hear the show, but you're the one that has to tell them. So please share this show with your friends. Also, head over and give us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts, and subscribe on YouTube. Those help people that neither you or I know to find the show and to really kind of get these tools that we're talking about this week and put them in our pockets. I hope you have a great week, and I will see you in 2 weeks right here on the Journey of Ruth Discipleship Podcast.